You think you can kidnap my father and play hero? You worthless piece of trash! The words cut through the salty Norfolk air like shrapnel from a deck gun. Harsh, commanding, unforgiving. Seaman First Class Emma Rodriguez froze. A warm container of Navy chili still clutched in her hand, and the frail old man gripping her arm like she was his only anchor in a storm-tossed sea. Admiral Marcus Hawthorne didn't blink, his steel-gray eyes sharp as a torpedo's edge, drilling into her like she was an enemy combatant holding a hostage. Step away from him now. Emma raised both hands, palms facing forward. Wait, sir. I found him 3 days ago. He was sitting alone at the bus depot near the naval station. He couldn't remember his name, couldn't remember where he belonged. Before she could finish explaining, Admiral Hawthorne's fist flew. It wasn't a disciplined strike. It was raw fury, landing across her cheekbone with a crack that echoed off the concrete pier. Emma stumbled backward, blood trickling from the corner of her mouth, shock washing over her face like an icy wave. The old man cried out, "Don't hurt Emma! She takes care of me!" Gasps erupted from the small crowd that had begun to gather. A dock worker nearby whispered, "Did he just assault her? Isn't that Admiral Hawthorne? Is she his father's nurse?" Another voice countered, "No, he says she kidnapped the old man." Phones emerged from pockets, screens illuminated. Social media was already broadcasting live. Emma pushed herself up from the pier, dazed and bleeding. "I found him sitting alone at the depot, sir. He was cold and confused. I was just trying to help him." Admiral Hawthorne pointed directly at her, his voice booming like a commanding officer addressing insubordinate crew. "Helped him? Is that what you call keeping him prisoner in your filthy apartment? You drugged him, didn't you?" "No, sir, I didn't." Emma's voice cracked as she struggled to stand straight, her hands trembling, stained with her own blood. The sirens arrived swiftly. 3 Navy shore patrol vehicles and 2 civilian police cars surrounded the scene. Uniformed personnel created a perimeter around the confrontation. "He assaulted her," one bystander called out. "She kidnapped my father," Admiral Hawthorne snapped back. "She's been hiding him for 3 days. He has Alzheimer's and dementia." The military police hesitated, caught between a bleeding sailor and a fleet admiral. The old man, whom Emma had been calling Chief, mumbled softly, "Emma gave me soup. I like the crackers she puts in it." "Seaman Rodriguez, step away from the civilian," an MP ordered. Admiral Hawthorne moved toward her again, but an officer intercepted him. "Sir, we'll handle this situation." "I want her arrested immediately," Admiral Hawthorne demanded. 2 military policemen grabbed Emma's arms, twisting them behind her back with practiced efficiency. Cold metal handcuffs snapped around her wrists. "This is a mistake, sir," she cried out. "I haven't done anything wrong." Admiral Hawthorne watched, breathing heavily, blood on his knuckles, jaw clenched tight as a ship's anchor chain. The old man looked on with tears filling his eyes. Why are they hurting Emma? Why is she crying? 3 days earlier, Captain James Chief Hawthorne had broken free from his captors. He wasn't entirely sure how it happened. The security door had been left slightly ajar while his kidnappers argued about the ransom demand. The man with the naval tattoos had stepped outside to make a phone call, and the others hadn't noticed him shuffle down the warehouse hallway in his stockings. They had taken him for leverage against his son, demanding Admiral Hawthorne pay handsomely for his father's safe return. But something had gone wrong with their plan, communication had broken down, and Chief had seized his moment of escape. Chief Hawthorne had wandered barefoot and disoriented into Emma's world, broken, soaked from a sudden downpour, and barely conscious from exposure. He had collapsed at the Norfolk Transit Center, trembling and drenched, whispering only fragments of memories. Marcus, my boy Marcus, the academy, the fleet. Emma had been walking past after completing her watch duty at the communications center. Most sailors would have hurried by, eager to get to their barracks or liberty calls. Instead, She had crouched beside him, wrapped him in her Navy peacoat, and called the base medical emergency line. When help was delayed due to a training exercise, she made a decision that would change both their lives forever. She brought him home, helped him bathe and change into clean clothes, fed him warm tomato soup with oyster crackers because he winced at anything too spicy, and let him sleep on her small couch with her rescued cat, Anchor, curled protectively on his chest. She asked for nothing in return, expected no reward or recognition. She had no idea the man resting in her modest apartment was the father of the most powerful admiral in the Atlantic Fleet. No idea there was a massive search operation underway involving multiple agencies. No idea she was about to become the center of a media storm that would shake the entire naval establishment. At the Norfolk Naval Station brig, fluorescent lights hummed overhead with military precision. Emma sat on a metal bench in the holding cell, lip swollen, cheekbone bruised purple, heart shattered like broken sonar. Hours bled into days without visitors, without communication, without hope. The media crucified her reputation. Sailor claims to rescue Admiral's father. Scam or genuine, read one headline. Another proclaimed, "Who is Emma Rodriguez? What we know about the sailor behind the disappearance." She lost her security clearance pending investigation. Her commanding officer stopped returning her calls. Fellow sailors began avoiding eye contact when she passed in the corridors during her brief supervised releases. 4 days later, the cell door opened with a metallic clank. "Rodriguez!" a voice called sharply. She looked up to see a woman in a crisp dress uniform entering, holding a manila folder thick with documents. "Name's Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen. I'm from the Naval Legal Service Office. Your friend Maria from the base daycare center contacted me. Said you helped her daughter when she was struggling with single motherhood last year, working extra shifts so she could attend night classes." Emma nodded slowly, barely daring to hope that someone still remembered her as more than a headline. Lieutenant Commander Chen sat across from her with military bearing. I pulled security footage from 4 different cameras along the transit route and base perimeter. Want to know what it shows? That afternoon, in a secure conference room at Fleet Forces Command Headquarters, Lieutenant Commander Chen played the footage before Admiral Hawthorne, his legal team, and 2 Naval Criminal Investigative Service agents. The screen displayed Chief Hawthorne alone, shivering on a bench under a flickering streetlight in civilian clothes, clearly disoriented and in distress. Emma approached cautiously, offering him a cup of coffee and her coat. No deception, no manipulation, just pure human compassion translated into action. Admiral Hawthorne's mouth opened slightly, color draining from his weathered face. He said nothing for a long moment. "You assaulted her," Lieutenant Commander Chen stated firmly, arms crossed in front of her chest. "Called her trash, destroyed her reputation across every news outlet on the eastern seaboard. And what did she do? She kept your father alive when his kidnappers lost control of their operation." The NCIS agents took detailed notes. "Admiral, we need to discuss your actions," one said quietly. Admiral Hawthorne struggled to find words. I didn't know the full situation." "She told you exactly what happened, sir," Lieutenant Commander Chen snapped back. "You just didn't listen over the sound of your own assumptions." Later that day, Emma was released from custody with a full apology from the base command. Admiral Hawthorne waited outside the legal office, dress uniform perfectly pressed, holding a certified check that could have covered her salary for the next decade. "I want to offer compensation," he said, avoiding direct eye contact with her bruised face. "For what I said. For the damage I caused to your career and reputation. I was completely wrong in my assessment and actions." Emma looked at the check, noting the substantial sum, then looked back at him with quiet dignity intact. "No, thank you, sir." Admiral Hawthorne's eyebrows lifted in surprise. "No? I didn't help your father for money," Emma said with steady resolve. "And I don't want your guilt payment, Admiral." Admiral Hawthorne blinked, clearly not expecting this response. "I want to make this situation right somehow." She looked him directly in the eyes with the bearing of a sailor who had found her moral compass. "You don't repair something like this with money, sir. You fix it by learning to look past your assumptions and seeing people for who they truly are, not who you expect them to be based on rank or circumstance." He opened his mouth but found no words adequate to the moment. She turned and walked away with her shoulders squared and her head held high, every inch a professional sailor. Emma walked down the steps of the headquarters building into the warm light of late afternoon. For the first time since the nightmare began, she walked freely, not just from confinement, but from the shame someone had tried to force upon her shoulders. Behind her, Admiral Hawthorne remained motionless and silent, watching her disappear into the crowd of uniformed personnel going about their duties. 3 days earlier, rain had battered the streets of Norfolk like sustained artillery fire. The port city had gone quiet in that particular way it only did when the weather turned violent and the wise stayed indoors. But Emma Rodriguez wasn't indoors. She was walking through the downpour, her sea bag slung over her shoulder, rain jacket fighting a losing battle against the elements. It had been a demanding day at the communications center, monitoring encrypted channels and coordinating with vessels across the Atlantic fleet. Her feet ached, her stomach growled, and the streetlights reflected off the wet pavement like scattered navigation beacons. She rounded the corner near the Norfolk Transit Center when she spotted him. An elderly man in civilian clothes sitting on a bench with no protection from the storm. His thin jacket was soaked through and his shoes were missing, revealing socks that were torn and muddy. He clutched a damp blanket around himself like battle dress, his eyes glassy and unfocused. He rocked slightly back and forth, whispering something repeatedly under his breath. "Marcus. Marcus. Where's Marcus?" Emma slowed her pace, military instincts engaging. Most people would have assumed he was homeless and kept walking. Hell, regulations suggested she should contact the proper authorities and continue to her quarters. But something about the man's posture, the way he trembled like a ship taking on water in heavy seas, made her stop. She approached carefully. "Sir, are you okay?" He didn't look up, didn't acknowledge her presence. She crouched down in front of him, her knees getting soaked on the rain-slicked concrete. "Do you know where you are, sir?" His voice came out cracked and barely audible. "Marcus is my boy. My good boy." "Is Marcus your son?" she asked gently. His lips quivered with effort. "He's in the Navy, like his old man, like me." Emma's heart constricted. The man didn't just seem lost in the storm. He seemed lost in time itself, like someone had opened his mind and let all his memories scatter like documents in a hurricane. "You're freezing, sir," she said softly. "Come on. Let's get you somewhere warm and dry." He flinched when she touched his arm, instinctively pulling away. "It's okay," she said in the same tone she used to calm frightened recruits during their first weeks of service. "I'm not going to hurt you. My name's Emma. I'm Navy, like you were. I live just a few blocks from here. I've got hot soup and a heater that actually works. You'll be safe there until we figure out how to help you." He stared at her like she was the first person who had spoken to him as a human being in years. Slowly, painfully, he allowed her to help him stand and take those first uncertain steps toward shelter. Back at her small apartment near the base, Emma gave him a warm towel, a clean set of sweatpants that had belonged to her brother before his deployment, and a bowl of Campbell's tomato soup with oyster crackers. He ate like a man who had been adrift for days. "What's your name, sir?" she asked gently. He paused, the spoon halfway to his lips, confusion clouding his features. I'm not sure. Chief, something. They called me Chief." "That's okay," she said with infinite patience. "We'll figure it out together." She decided to call him Chief, both as a term of respect and because it seemed to resonate with him somehow. She let him sleep on her couch, noting how he talked in his sleep, flinching at sounds only he could hear. She placed her best blanket over him, adjusted the space heater to keep the room comfortable, and left a small light on in the hallway because darkness seemed to agitate him. That first night, Chief cried out in his sleep, and Emma sat in a chair nearby, watching over him like a sentry on duty. The next morning, Emma prepared scrambled eggs and toast, watching as Chief stared at the plate like it contained treasures from a sunken ship. He spoke more that day, sharing random fragments of memory that seemed to surface and disappear like sonar contacts. The destroyer. She was beautiful. 21-gun salute. Marcus hated the ceremonies. None of it formed a complete picture, but Emma nodded and listened, treating each memory with the reverence it deserved. She posted a vague description on the base missing persons bulletin board, careful not to include identifying details that might put Chief at risk. She figured someone in the naval community would recognize him, or perhaps his memory would return enough for him to help identify himself. The local news was playing quietly on her small television when everything changed. Captain James Hawthorne, father of Fleet Admiral Marcus Hawthorne, was reportedly kidnapped 4 nights ago from his assisted living facility. The kidnappers demanded a substantial ransom. Authorities have not confirmed whether any money was delivered, and investigators now fear the worst. Emma turned from her small kitchen, coffee mug in hand, to look at the screen. The photograph that flashed across the broadcast made her nearly drop the mug. It was him, Chief, the same gentle eyes and distinctive bearing, just wearing a dress uniform instead of her borrowed sweatpants. That night, Emma debated contacting the authorities immediately. But something deep in her gut, something honed by years of military service and reading people under pressure, told her to wait and observe. The way Chief trembled when unfamiliar voices spoke loudly, the way he hid behind her when delivery personnel knocked on the door, suggested he wasn't just confused from his medical condition. He was genuinely afraid of something or someone. Then came that terrible morning. She had just returned from the base commissary with fresh vegetables when the convoy of official vehicles arrived. Black SUVs with government plates, shore patrol cars, and Admiral Hawthorne himself. She didn't even have time to set down her groceries before she was bleeding on the pier, her career in ruins, and her act of compassion twisted into something sinister by a grieving son who saw enemies where there were only helpers. Now, sitting in a sterile examination room at the base medical facility with a split lip and a bruise that painted half her face purple, Emma stared at the acoustic ceiling tiles while a corpsman documented her injuries. Her friend Lieutenant Tom Bradley sat beside her, flipping through legal documents with growing amazement. "They're dropping all charges," he said, relief evident in his voice. "The Admiral won't apologize officially, but the charges are gone." "Because of the surveillance footage?" Emma asked quietly. He nodded grimly. "Security cameras, traffic cams, even a doorbell camera from across the street. All time-stamped. Proves you weren't anywhere near him when the kidnapping occurred. He must have escaped from his captors and wandered until he collapsed at that transit stop." Tom continued reviewing the paperwork. "They arrested 3 suspects this morning, former Navy contractors who had worked security at his assisted living facility. Looks like they grabbed him during a scheduled transport to a medical appointment, had the whole thing planned out. But Chief fought back harder than they expected, managed to get loose during a shift change, and ran. That's how he ended up on that bench." Emma let out a long breath she had been holding for days. Tom looked at her with something approaching awe. "The Admiral wants to meet with you, privately. I'm not interested in his apologies right now. He offered substantial compensation for the damage to your reputation and career." She turned toward the small window, watching gray clouds gather over the Chesapeake Bay. "Tell him he can keep his money and his lawyers and his guilt." "What do you want then, Em?" Tom asked quietly. I want him to live the rest of his life knowing that a stranger did more for his father in 3 days than the entire military establishment did in 3 months. Tom said nothing, recognizing the truth in her words. She smiled, but there was no happiness in it. That's a debt that can't be paid with a check. Outside, the Norfolk rain felt like forgiveness that hadn't quite arrived yet. But Emma wasn't waiting for it anymore. She had learned something valuable about her own strength, and that knowledge was worth more than any Admiral's apology. The next morning, sunlight cut through the blinds of Emma's small apartment kitchen like signals from a lighthouse. It was the first clear day in over a week, and the base looked almost peaceful from her window. The ocean beyond the harbor stretched endlessly, reminding her why she had joined the Navy in the first place. Chief was awake early, sitting at her small table in the same sweater she had given him, staring out at the ships in the distance. His fingers were wrapped around a chipped Navy mug filled with coffee that she had made extra strong, the way sailors liked it. She poured herself a cup and joined him at the table. Sleep better last night, Chief? He nodded, though his eyes remained distant, fixed on something beyond the harbor. I dreamed about seabirds, he murmured thoughtfully. Flying over calm water. My son used to count them from the bridge when he was young, back when he would visit me on deployment. Emma smiled gently. Sounds peaceful, Chief. I remember the smell of salt air, he said, turning to face her with more clarity than she had seen since finding him. You ever been to sea, Emma? She nodded. 2 deployments, Pacific and Mediterranean. Destroyer escort duty. He brightened slightly. I commanded a destroyer once before everything changed. Before I got old and my mind started playing tricks on me, my Martha used to say the ocean kept me sane. She passed away 5 years ago and I haven't been the same since. Emma felt her throat tighten. It was the first time he had mentioned specific details about his life, real memories emerging from the fog of confusion. She sounds like she was an amazing woman. He nodded slowly, his eyes focusing on her face with sudden recognition of their shared humanity. She was my anchor, he said quietly. When she died, I felt like I was drifting without navigation. Emma reached across the table and gently touched his weathered hand. You're not drifting anymore, Chief. You're safe here. A knock at the door interrupted their quiet moment. Emma opened it to find Lieutenant Commander Chen standing with a distinguished-looking woman in her 60s, carrying a medical bag and wearing the insignia of the Navy Medical Corps. This is Dr. Patricia Vance, Lieutenant Commander Chen explained. Memory specialist from Walter Reed. Admiral Hawthorne requested she evaluate Chief's condition, but only if he's comfortable with the assessment. Emma looked back at Chief, who had turned in his chair with interest rather than fear. Do you know me, sir? Dr. Vance asked kindly, approaching him slowly. Chief studied her face intently. No, he said finally, but you have kind eyes, like Emma's. I'd like to talk with you if you're willing. The evaluation lasted nearly 2 hours. Emma sat nearby, quietly listening to questions that gradually unlocked pieces of Chief's memory. She learned his birthday, his service number, that he had served in Vietnam and later commanded vessels during the Gulf War. He remembered teaching Marcus to read navigation charts when the boy was barely tall enough to see over the plotting table. He hated math, Chief chuckled, speaking about his son. Said it was boring until I showed him how to calculate torpedo firing solutions. That made it a game. Dr. Vance took detailed notes. That's a significant memory, Chief, very precise. He won the base science fair with a project about sonar acoustics, Chief continued, his voice growing stronger. I was so proud, but I never told him enough. Work always came first. The Navy always came first. After the evaluation, as Dr. Vance packed up her equipment, Emma walked her to the door. Is he getting better? She asked quietly. Dr. Vance smiled with professional compassion. Memory is like radar, Emma. Sometimes the signal is strong, sometimes it fades, but he remembers what matters most. His love for his son, his pride in his service, his gratitude for your kindness. That's not nothing, that's everything. That afternoon, Emma received an official envelope delivered by a Navy messenger. The letterhead was unmistakable. Fleet Forces Command. Dear Seaman Rodriguez, the letter began. I owe you more than I can express in words or repay in a lifetime of service. My name is Admiral Marcus Hawthorne, and I have spent most of my career building systems that operate on logic, discipline, and control. What happened with my father revealed a failure of every system I thought I understood, especially the one that governs my own heart and judgment. I failed him, and I failed you in the most fundamental way an officer can fail, by allowing fear and assumption to override honor and truth. I know you declined financial compensation, but I want to offer you something different. A commission. The Navy needs officers who understand that our greatest strength comes not from our weapon systems or tactical superiority, but from our ability to see the humanity in others, even in the midst of crisis. Your actions demonstrated leadership qualities that cannot be taught in any academy or learned from any manual. You saw what others missed, cared when others walked past, and stood firm when others would have broken. Please consider accepting a direct commission to Lieutenant Junior grade with assignment to the fleet's new Community Outreach and Family Support Division. Not because of sympathy, but because you have proven you understand what it truly means to serve. You saved my father's life, and in doing so, you reminded me what honor actually looks like when it's tested. Respectfully, Admiral Marcus Hawthorne. Emma sat with the letter for a long time, reading it twice, then folding it carefully and placing it in her sea chest, next to her other important documents. She walked to the window and looked out at the harbor, watching sailors going about their duties, ships preparing for deployment, the endless rhythm of naval life continuing as it had for centuries. The next day, she took Chief for a walk along the waterfront. The air was crisp and clear, with seabirds calling overhead and the sound of ships' bells carrying across the water. Children played on the nearby playground while their military families enjoyed a weekend afternoon. Someone called out from a passing group of sailors, "Hey, Rodriguez, heard you're a hero now. Good for you." She waved back with a modest smile, appreciating the support but knowing that heroes were made by doing what needed to be done, not by seeking recognition for it. Chief stopped in front of the Naval Museum, pointing at a display visible through the windows. "That ship model," he said with sudden animation, "USS Constellation. I served on her sister ship when I was just a young seaman. You want to go in and look around?" Emma asked. He shook his head gently. "Just wanted to see her again. Sometimes memories are better when you don't disturb them too much." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching visitors enter and exit the museum, families learning about naval history, children wide-eyed at stories of adventure and service. After a while, Chief asked quietly, "Do you think Marcus remembers the day I taught him to tie nautical knots?" Emma considered her answer carefully. "I think he remembers more than he lets himself acknowledge, Chief. Sometimes, when we're busy commanding ships and fleets, we forget the simple lessons that made us who we are." He looked up at her with eyes that seemed clearer than they had been in days. "You're wise for someone so young, Emma. Maybe that's what comes from learning to listen, instead of just waiting to speak." That evening, Emma sat on her small balcony watching the sun set over the Chesapeake Bay. Tom joined her, bringing 2 cups of coffee and settling into the plastic chair beside her. "You decided about the commission offer?" he asked. She sipped her coffee thoughtfully. "I'm considering it." "It's a big step," Tom observed. "From enlisted to officer, from following orders to giving them." "I know, but maybe that's exactly what I need. A chance to help other families before they end up scattered and lost like Chief was." Tom nodded approvingly. "You'd be good at it. You've got the heart for it." They sat in comfortable silence, watching a destroyer return to port, her crew manning the rails in dress uniform as she approached the pier. The sight never got old, Emma reflected. Ships coming home, families reunited, the ancient rhythm of departure and return that defined naval life. Behind them, through the thin walls of the apartment, they could hear Chief humming an old sea chanty, content and safe for perhaps the first time in months. Later that night, Emma found Chief standing at the window, looking out at the lights of the fleet anchored in the harbor. The ships looked like floating cities, each one representing hundreds of sailors serving far from their own homes and families. He turned when she entered the room. "I've been thinking about what you said today, Emma, about memories and how we treat them." She settled into the chair across from him. "What were you thinking about, Chief?" He smiled with a clarity that had been absent for weeks. "I was thinking that some people spend their whole lives trying to build monuments to themselves, trying to be remembered for their achievements and their rank and their victories. But maybe the only monuments that really matter are the ones we build in other people's hearts through kindness." Emma felt tears rise in her eyes, moved by the simple wisdom of a man whom others had written off as confused and lost. "You built one in mine, Chief. A big one." He reached out and patted her hand with the gentle strength of a lifetime sailor. "And you, my dear, you built one that will last long after these old ships rust away and these harbors are forgotten. You reminded an old man that he still mattered, that his stories were worth hearing, that his life had value beyond his usefulness to others." The next morning brought news that would change everything. Emma received a call from Lieutenant Commander Chen, informing her that Chief's kidnappers had been formally charged with multiple federal crimes, and that the investigation had revealed a wider network of exploitation targeting elderly veterans and their families. The case was making headlines across the military community, not because of the criminal charges, but because it highlighted the vulnerability of aging veterans and the importance of community support systems. More importantly, Admiral Hawthorne had requested a meeting. Not a formal military meeting, but a personal conversation between a father and the person who had saved his father's life when everyone else had failed to protect him. Emma agreed, but on her terms, in her space, with Chief present, if he wanted to be there. Admiral Hawthorne arrived that afternoon wearing civilian clothes, carrying a small wrapped package, and looking every bit as nervous as a midshipman reporting for his first duty assignment. Chief was sitting in his usual spot by the window when the Admiral knocked, and Emma could see the recognition flicker in the old man's eyes when he saw his son standing in the doorway. "Marcus?" Chief said softly, rising from his chair with more energy than Emma had seen him display in days. "Dad?" Admiral Hawthorne replied, his voice breaking slightly. "I'm sorry I took so long to find you." The two men embraced, and Emma felt her own eyes fill with tears at the sight of a family reconnecting across the gulf that time and circumstances had created between them. Admiral Hawthorne turned to Emma, his face serious, but no longer hostile. "I brought you something," he said, offering her the package. "It's not money, not a bribe, not an attempt to buy your forgiveness. It's something I should have given you the day I met you." She opened it carefully to find a small wooden plaque, hand-carved with the Navy Corps values, honor, courage, and commitment. Below them, an inscription, "To Seaman Rodriguez, who exemplified these values when it mattered most. With respect and gratitude, Admiral M. Hawthorne." Emma ran her fingers over the carved words, feeling the weight of recognition from someone whose opinion she had learned to value despite their terrible first encounter. "Thank you, sir. This means more than you know." Admiral Hawthorne looked between Emma and his father, both of them people who had shown him different aspects of honor under pressure. "I've learned more about leadership in the past week than I did in 20 years of command," he said quietly. "Real leadership isn't about having the authority to give orders. It's about having the wisdom to see clearly and the courage to act on what you see, even when it costs you something." Chief spoke up from his chair by the window. "Marcus, I want you to know something important. Emma didn't just keep me fed and warm. She listened to my stories, even the ones that didn't make sense. She treated me like I was still a person worth knowing, not just a problem to be solved." Admiral Hawthorne nodded, his eyes focusing on Emma with newfound respect. "I see that now, Dad. I see a lot of things more clearly now." They spent the next hour talking, sharing stories, and beginning to bridge the gap that had grown between father and son over years of demanding military careers and missed opportunities for connection. Emma served coffee and listened, occasionally adding her own observations about Chief's remarkable memory for naval history and his pride in his son's achievements. As the afternoon wore on, she could see both men relaxing into a relationship that distance and duty had strained, but never broken. When Admiral Hawthorne finally prepared to leave, he asked Emma privately about the commission offer. "Have you decided?" She looked out at the harbor, then back at Chief, who was dozing peacefully in his chair with Anchor curled on his lap. "I've decided to accept it, sir, but I have conditions." He raised his eyebrows. "Conditions? I want to work with families like yours, helping to prevent the kind of isolation and vulnerability that made Chief a target in the first place. I want to build programs that keep our veterans connected to the community they served, not warehoused and forgotten. And I want to do it my way, with respect and dignity, not bureaucratic efficiency." Admiral Hawthorne smiled for the first time since she had met him. "Those aren't conditions, Rodriguez. Those are exactly the reasons I want you for this job." As the weeks passed, Emma prepared for her new responsibilities while continuing to care for Chief, who had decided to move into a senior living facility closer to his son, but with Emma as his primary emergency contact and regular visitor. The transition was emotional for both of them, but Chief insisted that Emma needed to focus on her career and the opportunity to help other families. "You saved me," he told her on moving day. "Now go save some others." Emma's commissioning ceremony was held at the base chapel, with Chief and Admiral Hawthorne both in attendance, along with her family, who had flown in from Arizona to witness their daughter's promotion from enlisted sailor to commissioned officer. As she raised her right hand to take the oath of office, Emma thought about the chain of events that had brought her to this moment. A chance encounter with a lost man on a rainy night, a decision to care rather than walk past, and the courage to stand up for what was right, even when powerful people tried to make her doubt herself. The new Lieutenant Junior Grade Rodriguez reported to her first assignment the following Monday, tasked with developing programs to support military families and prevent the kind of exploitation that had nearly destroyed Chief's life. Her first initiative was a buddy system pairing younger active-duty personnel with retired veterans, creating connections that would provide both companionship and security for those who had served their country faithfully. On quiet evenings, Emma would visit Chief at his new residence, bringing coffee and updates about her work. They would sit by the window overlooking the harbor, watching ships come and go, sharing stories about the day's events. Chief's memory continued to fluctuate, but his appreciation for Emma's friendship remained constant, a bright thread connecting past service to present purpose. Admiral Hawthorne made regular visits as well, rebuilding his relationship with his father and learning to see him not just as a responsibility, but as a source of wisdom and perspective. The three of them became an unlikely family, bound together by crisis and strengthened by mutual respect and affection. Emma's programs grew in scope and effectiveness, earning recognition throughout the fleet and serving as models for other commands. But she never forgot the lesson learned that rainy night at the Norfolk Transit Center. Sometimes the most important service you can provide is simply seeing another person's humanity and responding to it with compassion. That understanding shaped every policy she developed, every program she implemented, and every young sailor she mentored. Years later, when Emma had been promoted to lieutenant commander and was running veteran support programs across the entire Atlantic Fleet, she would still receive letters from families whose lives had been touched by her initiatives. Each one reminded her that honor wasn't about rank or recognition, but about the daily choice to serve others with dignity and respect, especially when no one was watching and no one would ever know. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from Chief himself, who kept a photograph on his dresser of Emma in her dress blues, with an inscription in his shaky handwriting. To the sailor who reminded an old salt that heroes come in all ranks and every act of kindness matters. Below that, in smaller letters, he had added, "The best officers are made by the biggest hearts." The photograph sat next to another image, this one of Admiral Hawthorne and Chief together on the bridge of a destroyer, both younger and both smiling at a shared moment of pride and connection. Two generations of naval service connected by love, separated by duty, and reunited by the compassion of a young sailor who understood that serving others meant seeing them as more than their problems or their past. Emma's story spread throughout the naval community, not as a tale of heroism or dramatic rescue, but as a reminder of the values that made military service meaningful. Honor, courage, and commitment weren't just words to be recited at ceremonies, but principles to be lived daily in the choices people made when confronted with others' needs and vulnerabilities. The Norfolk Transit Center installed a small plaque near the bench where Emma had found Chief, not to commemorate that specific incident, but to honor all the acts of kindness that went unrecorded and unrecognized. The inscription read, "In memory of those who serve by seeing others' needs and responding with compassion." It became a gathering place for families, a reminder that service took many forms, and that the greatest victories were often the quietest ones. Emma would sometimes walk past that bench during her evening runs, remembering the man she had found there and the journey that simple act of caring had set in motion. She never regretted the decision to stop, to help, to take responsibility for someone else's welfare, even when it complicated her own life. That choice had led to everything meaningful that followed: her commission, her career in family support services, and most importantly, the knowledge that she had made a difference in the lives of people who needed an advocate. The naval community began implementing the Rodriguez Protocol, a comprehensive system for protecting and supporting military families during times of crisis or vulnerability. The protocol emphasized early intervention, community connections, and the recognition that every service member and veteran deserved dignity regardless of their current circumstances. Emma found herself traveling to bases across the country, training other officers in the principles she had learned through experience. Listen first, judge never, and always assume positive intent until proven otherwise. During one of her training sessions at the Naval War College, a young ensign approached her after the presentation. "Ma'am, how do you know when to get involved versus when to call the proper authorities?" Emma considered the question carefully, remembering her own moment of decision on that rainy night. "You get involved when your conscience tells you that walking away would be wrong," she replied. "The proper authorities are important, but they can't be everywhere at once. Sometimes you're the authority that matters most, the person who chooses to see someone else's humanity and act on it." The ensign nodded thoughtfully. "What if you're wrong? What if the situation is more complicated than it appears?" "Then you adapt and learn," Emma said simply. "But you don't let the fear of being wrong prevent you from trying to do right. The worst mistake isn't helping someone who doesn't need it. It's walking past someone who does." On Chief's 80th birthday, Emma and Admiral Hawthorne organized a small celebration at the senior living facility. The community room was filled with naval memorabilia, photographs from Chief's career, and current residents who had come to know him through Emma's regular visits. Chief sat at the head table wearing his old dress uniform, looking more alert and engaged than he had in years. Admiral Hawthorne stood to make a toast, his voice carrying the authority of command but tempered by genuine emotion. "Today we celebrate not just a birthday, but a life of service that continues to inspire others. My father taught me about duty and honor through his example, but Emma Rodriguez taught me about compassion and wisdom through hers. Together, They showed me that true leadership means seeing the person behind the problem and responding with both strength and kindness. Chief raised his coffee cup with a steady hand. To Emma, who reminds us that heroes don't always wear stars on their collars. Sometimes they wear the stripes of a sailor who chooses to care when caring is difficult. And to my son Marcus, who learned that being wrong isn't a failure if it leads to being better. The room erupted in gentle applause, and Emma felt the same warm satisfaction she had experienced that first morning when Chief had smiled at her over a bowl of tomato soup. Later that evening, as the celebration wound down, Emma sat with Chief on the facility's waterfront deck, watching the sunset paint the Chesapeake Bay in shades of gold and crimson. A destroyer was returning to port in the distance, her crew undoubtedly eager to reunite with their families after months at sea. Chief followed her gaze to the ship and smiled. "You know what I've learned from all this, Emma?" She shook her head, waiting for his wisdom. "I learned that the most important battles aren't fought with weapons or tactics. They're fought with patience and understanding and the willingness to stand up for people who can't stand up for themselves." Emma squeezed his weathered hand gently. "You taught me that too, Chief. Even when you were lost and confused, you taught me that dignity isn't something you earn through achievement. It's something you deserve simply by being human." He looked at her with eyes that were clear and focused, despite his age. "And you taught an old sailor that kindness is the strongest force in the universe. It can break through barriers that cannons can't touch and heal wounds that medicine can't reach." As autumn arrived, Emma received orders for her next assignment, a promotion to lieutenant commander and transfer to Naval Personnel Command in Washington, where she would oversee family support programs for the entire Navy. It was a significant advancement, placing her in a position to influence policy at the highest levels and ensure that the lessons learned from Chief's situation would be applied throughout the fleet. Her change of command ceremony was held on the pier at Norfolk Naval Base, with Chief and Admiral Hawthorne both in attendance, along with dozens of sailors and families whose lives had been touched by her programs. As she stood before the assembled crowd, Emma reflected on how much had changed since that rainy night when she had chosen to help a stranger in need. In her farewell speech, Emma emphasized the values that had guided her work: service before self, integrity under pressure, and the recognition that military strength came not just from ships and weapons, but from the bonds between people who chose to support one another through difficult times. "Every sailor here has the power to make a difference in someone's life," she said. "Not through grand gestures or heroic acts, but through daily choices to see others with compassion and respond to their needs with courage and commitment." After the ceremony, Chief presented Emma with a gift: his original Naval Academy class ring, polished to a brilliant shine and inscribed with new words on the inside of the band. "To Emma, who showed us what honor really means." She slipped it onto a chain around her neck, wearing it over her heart as a reminder of the responsibility that came with leadership and the importance of never forgetting the human element in military service. Admiral Hawthorne approached as she was saying goodbye to other well-wishers. "Rodriguez, I have one final request," he said with uncharacteristic nervousness. "I'd like you to consider Chief as your permanent next of kin for emergency contact purposes. If something happens to me, I want someone who truly understands him to be responsible for his care." Emma was touched by the trust implicit in the request. "Of course, Admiral. It would be an honor." As Emma prepared to leave Norfolk for Washington, she spent her last evening walking through the neighborhoods near the base, revisiting the places where her journey had begun. She stopped at the transit center where she had found Chief, noting the plaque that had been installed and the small garden that community volunteers had planted nearby. Families often sat there now, waiting for buses or simply enjoying the peaceful space, and Emma liked to think that Chief would approve of the way his story had become part of the community's shared memory. Her new position in Washington brought new challenges and opportunities. Emma found herself briefing senior officials on family support initiatives, testifying before congressional committees about veterans' needs, and developing policies that would affect thousands of military families across the globe. But she never lost sight of the individual faces behind the statistics, the personal stories that gave meaning to the regulations and programs she helped create. During her first year in Washington, Emma received a letter from a young sailor stationed in Japan whose grandfather had been helped by one of her programs. The sailor wrote about how the support network Emma had established had prevented his grandfather from being victimized by financial scammers and had connected him with other veterans in his community. "Your program saved my family from falling apart," the sailor wrote. "My grandfather says you're proof that the Navy takes care of its own, even after the uniform comes off." Emma kept the letter in her desk drawer next to other correspondence from families who had been helped by the initiatives she had developed. Each letter served as a reminder of why her work mattered and motivation to continue advocating for those who needed support but might not know how to ask for it. The relationship between Emma, Chief, and Admiral Hawthorne continued to evolve over the years. Emma made regular trips back to Norfolk to visit Chief, often bringing updates about her work and stories from other bases she had visited. Admiral Hawthorne, now serving as Chief of Naval Operations, frequently joined these visits, and the three of them had developed the kind of familial bond that transcended military rank and formal protocol. During one visit, Chief announced that he had been working on a project with the facility's activities director, a memoir about his naval career and the lessons he had learned about service, family, and the importance of maintaining connections across generations. "I want young sailors to understand that service doesn't end when you retire," he explained. "It just changes form. Emma and Marcus have shown me that the best way to honor your past service is to keep serving others in whatever way you can." Emma helped Chief with the editing process, contributing her own perspective on the events that had brought them together and the impact those experiences had had on her own understanding of military values. The resulting book, titled Anchored by Kindness, A Sailor's Journey Through Service and Family, became a bestseller within the military community and was required reading at several naval training programs. The book's success led to speaking engagements for both Emma and Chief, sharing their story at military ceremonies, veterans events, and family support conferences across the country. Emma was always struck by how their experience resonated with audiences, particularly the message that heroism often looked like simple human decency rather than dramatic rescue operations. During one presentation at the Naval Academy, a midshipman asked Emma what advice she would give to future officers about leadership. Emma thought for a moment, then replied, "Remember that every person you encounter has a story, a family, and inherent dignity that deserves respect. Your job as a leader isn't just to accomplish the mission. It's to ensure that the people under your command know they matter as individuals, not just as resources. The moment you stop seeing the humanity in others is the moment you stop being the kind of leader our Navy needs." The midshipman followed up with another question. "How do you balance compassion with the need to maintain discipline and military standards?" Emma smiled, recognizing the same concerns she had wrestled with throughout her career. "Compassion and standards aren't opposing forces," she explained. "The highest military standard is taking care of your people, ensuring they have what they need to succeed, and treating them with the dignity they've earned through their service. Discipline without compassion is just authoritarianism. Compassion without standards is just sentiment. Real leadership requires both." As Chief entered his 80s, his health began to decline gradually, but his spirits remained strong thanks to the community Emma had helped build around him. The senior living facility had become a model for veteran care, incorporating many of the principles Emma had developed through her programs, maintaining connections to the military community, providing meaningful activities that honored residents' service experiences, and ensuring that family members remained involved in care decisions. Emma received a promotion to commander, making her one of the youngest officers ever to reach that rank in the personnel community. Her new responsibilities included oversight of family readiness programs across all naval installations worldwide, giving her the opportunity to implement the lessons learned from Chief's case on a global scale. She established partnerships with civilian organizations, developed training programs for military families, and created support networks that spanned multiple time zones and cultures. Despite her increased responsibilities, Emma never missed Chief's birthday celebrations or important medical appointments. Their bond had transcended the original circumstances of their meeting, evolving into something resembling the relationship between a daughter and beloved grandfather. Chief often introduced Emma to visitors as "my Admiral," a title that meant more to her than any official rank she had achieved. Admiral Hawthorne, now approaching retirement himself, began to rely increasingly on Emma's judgment in matters involving family support and personnel welfare. Their professional relationship had evolved into one of mutual respect and collaboration, with Emma serving as an unofficial advisor on policies affecting military families and veterans. The Admiral frequently credited Emma with teaching him to see beyond the immediate military implications of decisions and consider their human impact as well. During one of their strategy sessions, Admiral Hawthorne reflected on how much the Navy had changed since Emma's intervention in his father's crisis. "We're more focused on people now," he observed, "more aware that our strength comes from taking care of our own, not just projecting power overseas." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "It took a crisis to teach us that lesson, but now we know better. The challenge is making sure we don't forget when the next generation of leaders takes over." Emma's influence extended beyond policy development into mentorship of younger officers who showed interest in family support and personnel welfare. She established an informal network of advocates throughout the fleet, officers who understood that career advancement and mission accomplishment were meaningless if they came at the expense of human dignity and family stability. These officers carried Emma's philosophy into their own commands, creating a ripple effect that improved conditions for military families across the entire naval service. The Norfolk Transit Center, where Emma had first encountered Chief, became an unofficial pilgrimage site for sailors and officers who had heard their story. The small garden and memorial plaque had grown into a larger memorial park dedicated to the principle of service through compassion. Families would bring children there to teach them about the importance of helping others, and military personnel would sometimes stop by during difficult periods in their own lives to remember that challenges could be overcome through community support and individual courage. Emma established an annual award in Chief's name, recognizing junior sailors who demonstrated exceptional care for their fellow service members and their families. The Chief Hawthorne Award for Compassionate Service became one of the most coveted recognitions in the Navy, not because of its monetary value, but because recipients were chosen based on peer nominations and demonstrated long-term impact on their communities. The first recipient of the award was a young sailor stationed in Guam who had organized a support network for military spouses dealing with deployment separations. The sailor had created childcare cooperatives, established emergency assistance funds, and developed communication systems that helped families stay connected across time zones and cultural barriers. When Emma presented the award, she was reminded of her own early days as an enlisted sailor, trying to balance personal convictions with military obligations. Chief's health continued to decline gradually, but his mind remained sharp enough for him to take great pride in Emma's accomplishments and the programs that bore his name. During their visits, he would often share memories from his own early naval career, drawing parallels between the challenges he had faced as a young sailor and the obstacles Emma had overcome in developing her family support initiatives. "You're doing what I always wished I could do," he told her during one visit. "You're making sure that no one has to face their problems alone." Emma's final promotion came sooner than expected. Selection for captain, with assignment as commanding officer of the Naval Family Support Command. the position would make her responsible for every family support program in the Navy, from child care facilities to deployment counseling to veteran transition services. It was a culmination of everything she had worked toward since that rainy night in Norfolk, but it also meant increased time away from Chief and the personal relationships that had shaped her understanding of service. At her promotion ceremony, held at the Pentagon with Secretary of the Navy officiating, Emma wore Chief's class ring on a chain around her neck and carried his original service record in her uniform pocket. Admiral Hawthorne, now retired but serving as a special advisor to the Secretary, read the citation that accompanied her promotion. For exceptional service in developing and implementing family support programs that have fundamentally improved the welfare of naval personnel and their dependents worldwide. Captain Rodriguez has demonstrated that military excellence and human compassion are not competing values, but complementary strengths that define the finest traditions of naval service. In her acceptance speech, Emma reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. Military service is ultimately about serving others, whether that means defending our nation's interests overseas or ensuring that our own people have the support they need to serve effectively. I learned that lesson from a confused elderly man sitting on a bench in Norfolk, and I've tried to honor that lesson every day since. Our strength as a military comes not from our technology or our tactics, but from our commitment to each other and to the families who support us. Chief was too frail to travel to Washington for the ceremony, but he watched the live stream from his room at the senior living facility, surrounded by friends and staff members who had become part of his extended family. When Emma's speech ended, Chief smiled and told the assembled group, "That's my Admiral." She learned to see what others missed, and now she's teaching the whole Navy to do the same. Emma's new responsibilities required her to travel extensively, visiting naval installations around the world and assessing the effectiveness of family support programs in different cultural and operational contexts. During a visit to a base in Italy, she met with military spouses who were struggling with language barriers and cultural isolation. Their stories reminded her of Chief's confusion and disorientation during those first days in her apartment, and she implemented new programs to help military families adapt to overseas assignments while maintaining their connections to the broader naval community. A similar visit to a base in Japan led to the development of intergenerational support programs that connected younger military families with retired personnel living in the local community. The programs were modeled on Emma's relationship with Chief, recognizing that mutual support could benefit both active-duty families and veteran retirees who were looking for ways to remain connected to military life. Throughout her travels, Emma maintained regular contact with Chief through video calls and letters, sharing stories from her visits and seeking his advice on complex family situations that required creative solutions. Chief's insights, shaped by decades of military service and personal experience with family challenges, proved invaluable in helping Emma develop policies that addressed real human needs rather than bureaucratic requirements. During one of their conversations, Chief expressed concern about Emma's own family life, pointing out that her dedication to helping others shouldn't come at the expense of her own relationships and personal happiness. "You've spent so many years taking care of other people's families," he said gently. "When are you going to start your own?" Emma had been so focused on her career and her responsibilities that she hadn't seriously considered marriage or children, but Chief's question prompted her to reflect on what she wanted for her own future beyond military service. That reflection led Emma to reconnect with Tom Bradley, her friend from Norfolk, who had supported her through the crisis with Chief and who had remained a consistent presence in her life despite their different career paths. Tom had left active duty to pursue civilian law practice but remained involved in veterans affairs through volunteer work. Their friendship had deepened over the years into something that resembled family, built on shared values and mutual respect rather than romantic attraction initially. When Emma was promoted to captain, Tom had been one of the first people to congratulate her, and his pride in her accomplishments had been evident in every conversation they shared. During a visit to Norfolk to see Chief, Emma and Tom spent an evening walking along the waterfront, discussing their respective careers and their hopes for the future. It was during that conversation that Emma realized their friendship had evolved into something deeper, and she found herself imagining a future that included both her military service and a personal life with someone who understood and supported her values. Their relationship developed slowly, built on the foundation of years of mutual support and shared experiences. Tom understood the demands of military life from his own service, and he appreciated Emma's dedication to helping military families even when it required her to travel extensively or work long hours on complex problems. When they announced their engagement, Chief was one of the first people they told, and his joy at the news was evident despite his declining health. The wedding was held at the Norfolk Naval Base Chapel, with Chief serving as Emma's honorary father, despite his frail condition. Admiral Hawthorne performed the ceremony, having been ordained as a minister during his retirement. The guest list included sailors and officers from across Emma's career, along with families who had been helped by her programs and veterans who had found community through the initiatives she had developed. Chief's presence at the wedding was a testament to the bonds that had formed between him, Emma, and the extended military family that had grown around their relationship. During the reception, he gave a brief speech that brought tears to many eyes. "Emma saved my life when I was lost and forgotten. But she did more than that. She showed me that family isn't just about blood relations or legal documents. It's about people who choose to care for each other, who stand by each other through difficult times, and who never give up on each other even when giving up would be easier. Today, our family is growing, and I couldn't be more proud." Emma's marriage to Tom marked the beginning of a new chapter in her life, one that balanced her professional responsibilities with personal happiness and fulfillment. They settled in the Washington area, where Emma continued her work at Naval Family Support Command, while Tom established a law practice specializing in veterans affairs and military family legal issues. Their combined expertise made them a formidable team in advocating for military families and veterans' rights. Chief's health continued to decline gradually, but he remained alert and engaged with the world around him through Emma's regular visits and updates about her work. He took particular pride in the programs that had been established in his name and in the recognition Emma had received for her innovative approaches to family support and veteran care. Even as his physical capabilities diminished, his wisdom and perspective continued to influence Emma's decision-making and policy development. The end came peacefully on a spring morning when the cherry blossoms were blooming around the tidal basin, and the Potomac River reflected the clear blue sky that reminded Chief of his favorite days at sea. Emma was at his bedside, along with Admiral Hawthorne and several staff members from the senior living facility who had become part of his chosen family over the years. His final words were characteristic of the man who had taught them all about dignity, service, and the power of human connection. "Take care of each other. That's what matters most." Chief's funeral was held at Arlington National Cemetery, with full military honors befitting his rank and service. Emma delivered the eulogy, speaking about the lessons he had taught her and the impact he had had on countless lives through the programs and initiatives that bore his name. The ceremony was attended by hundreds of people whose lives had been touched by Chief's story. Sailors and officers, military families, veterans, and civilians who had learned about the importance of compassion and community support through the example set by an elderly man and the young sailor who had chosen to help him. In the months following Chief's death, Emma found herself reflecting on the legacy he had left behind and the responsibilities that came with carrying on his work. The programs they had developed together continued to grow and evolve, adapting to new challenges and changing circumstances, while maintaining their core focus on human dignity and family support. Emma established a scholarship fund in Chief's name, providing educational opportunities for children of military families and veterans who demonstrated the same values of service and compassion that had defined his life. Admiral Hawthorne, now fully retired but still serving as an advisor to Emma's command, often spoke about how his father's story had changed not just his own perspective on leadership, but the Navy's approach to family support and veteran care. "He taught us that strength comes from taking care of each other," the Admiral would say during speaking engagements. Emma showed us how to put that lesson into practice, and together they changed the way our Navy thinks about service and family. Emma's own career continued to advance, with recognition from the highest levels of military and civilian leadership for her innovative approaches to family support and her success in reducing military family stress and veteran isolation. She was selected for promotion to Rear Admiral, making her one of the youngest officers ever to achieve flag rank in the personnel community. The promotion ceremony was held at the Naval Academy, with the superintendent noting that Emma's career exemplified the Academy's motto of service before self and demonstrated how individual acts of courage and compassion could transform entire institutions. In her acceptance speech, Rear Admiral Rodriguez reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment and the people who had made it possible. "Military leadership isn't about commanding ships or winning battles, though those things matter. Real leadership is about seeing the humanity in others and creating conditions where everyone can serve with dignity and purpose. I learned that lesson from a confused elderly man who needed help, and I've tried to honor that lesson throughout my career. Every sailor, every family member, every veteran deserves to be seen as a whole person with inherent worth and dignity, not just as a problem to be solved or a resource to be managed." The speech was widely circulated throughout the naval community and became required viewing for officer training programs at multiple levels. Emma's philosophy of service through seeing became a cornerstone of naval leadership development, emphasizing the importance of understanding and responding to individual needs while accomplishing broader organizational objectives. Tom's law practice continued to grow, focusing on cases involving military family rights, veteran benefits, and issues related to military spouse employment and education. He frequently collaborated with Emma's command on policy development, providing legal expertise that ensured new programs were structured effectively and protected the rights of military families. Their marriage had become a partnership in every sense, combining their respective skills and experiences in service of their shared commitment to military families and veterans. The Norfolk Transit Center Memorial had grown into a significant landmark, with the original garden and plaque expanded into a larger park that included walking trails, picnic areas, and an information center that told the story of Chief and Emma while educating visitors about military family support resources. The park hosted an annual Day of Service, where military personnel, veterans, and community members gathered to perform volunteer activities supporting local military families and veteran organizations. Emma's influence extended far beyond the military community, as her approaches to family support and veteran care were adopted by civilian organizations, government agencies, and non-profit groups working with veterans and their families. She served on multiple boards and advisory committees, sharing her expertise and advocating for policies that recognized the unique challenges faced by military families and the importance of community support in addressing those challenges. The Chief Hawthorne Award for Compassionate Service had become one of the most prestigious recognitions in the Navy, with recipients going on to leadership positions throughout the fleet and carrying forward the values of service and compassion that defined Emma's approach to military life. Award winners were invited to an annual symposium where they shared their experiences, developed new initiatives, and built networks that extended the impact of their individual efforts. During the 10th anniversary of Chief's passing, Emma returned to Norfolk for a memorial ceremony at the Transit Center Park. The event brought together people from across the country whose lives had been touched by Chief's story. former recipients of the award bearing his name, military families who had been helped by the programs Emma had developed, and veterans who had found community and support through initiatives inspired by the compassion Chief had received during his final years. Emma spoke to the assembled crowd about the enduring legacy of the man who had taught her that military service was ultimately about seeing and caring for others. Chief Hawthorne didn't set out to change the Navy or transform how we think about military families and veterans. He was just an elderly man who got lost and confused and needed help. But his willingness to accept kindness from a stranger and his gratitude for that kindness taught us all something profound about what service really means. We honor his memory not just by remembering his story, but by living the values he exemplified: dignity, compassion, and the recognition that we are all connected by our shared humanity. The ceremony concluded with the dedication of a new memorial sculpture depicting an elderly man and a young sailor sitting together on a bench, sharing a meal and conversation. The inscription read, "In honor of Chief James Hawthorne and Rear Admiral Emma Rodriguez, whose chance encounter reminded us that military service begins and ends with our commitment to each other." The sculpture became a gathering place for military families and veterans, a tangible reminder that service took many forms and that the greatest victories were often the quietest ones. As Emma entered the final phase of her military career, she began preparing for retirement and the transition to civilian life while ensuring that the programs and initiatives she had developed would continue to serve military families and veterans long after her departure from active duty. She worked with younger officers to document the lessons learned from her experiences and to establish sustainable systems that could adapt to changing circumstances while maintaining their core focus on human dignity and family support. The story of Chief Hawthorne and Emma Rodriguez had become more than just a tale of individual heroism or administrative success. It had become a reminder of the values that made military service meaningful and a testament to the power of human connection in overcoming challenges and building stronger communities. Their legacy lived on in the thousands of military families who had been helped by the programs they had inspired, in the officers who had learned to lead with compassion as well as competence, and in the veterans who had found dignity and purpose through the community connections that Emma's initiatives had fostered. The simple act of sharing a meal with a confused elderly man had grown into a transformation of how the world's most powerful Navy thought about service, family, and the bonds that connected people across generations and circumstances. It demonstrated that heroism often looked like ordinary human decency, that leadership meant seeing others' needs and responding with courage and creativity, and that the greatest military strength came not from weapons or tactics, but from the commitment to care for each other with dignity and respect. In the end, the story affirmed a truth that both Chief and Emma had understood from the beginning. Military service was ultimately about serving others, and the highest honor came not from rank or recognition, but from knowing that your actions had made someone else's life better, safer, and more meaningful. That understanding had shaped every policy Emma had developed, every program she had implemented, and every life she had touched throughout her remarkable career, creating a legacy that would endure long after the last ship had returned to port and the final salute had been rendered.